is Superman? That might sound like a simple, stupid question, and yet, as someone who hasn't read many superhero comics, I didn't really know the answer. I mean, there are so many different versions of the character, it can be hard to even know where to start. And yet, I've wanted to try and get into superhero stuff more for a while now. So I figured it was time to just pick up some stories, hunker down, and get reading. And surprisingly, one of the comics I experienced also asked that question. Who is Superman? And the answer it provides? Well, it led to one of the most powerful comics I've ever read. So join me today as we discuss the comic that made me love Superman. But first, this video is sponsored by Opera GX, a browser built for gamers. Opera GX makes browsing more you than ever before, with tons of options for customization, personalization, and modding. Recently, it's gone through a major update. It's got a cleaner mod interface, settings, and overall UI. All the same features you need are here, a RAM, network, and CPU limiter, for example. Now it's just even easier to find and use everything you want. Speaking of making the browser your own, though, mods. Opera already provided the most customization out of any browser, but now it's even better. Each one can have its own splash screen, background music, sounds, fonts, and icons, themes and colors, shaders, and wallpapers. And if you want to change anything, just go to the instantly accessible mods menu and make it whatever you want. But what if you're worried it'll be tricky to switch over from your current browser? Well, no problem there either. It's easy. Just import your old settings and extensions like this, and there you go. You're done. So if you're ready to start browsing your way, check out Opera GX using my link in the description below. Thanks to them for sponsoring today's video, and thank you for watching. What does Superman mean? To me, that's the central question Superman for All Seasons asks and answers across its 4 issues. However, there isn't just a single answer. There are 4, one for each issue's narrator as they tell us about a season with Superman in their life. It's a structure that encourages a contemplative pace, placing most of its focus not on action and adventure, but on a more down-to-earth look at the characters. First, there's Spring and Jonathan Kent's perspective. Here, the contrast between Clark and Superman is used to tackle the idea of growing up in general, and the moment-to-moment exploration of this struggle is just so heartfelt and genuine. For example, there's this scene where Martha and Jonathan are discussing Clark's changes, how their son is capable of things they don't understand, that he doesn't understand. And it's only because of those strange abilities that, in the dark loneliness of his room, he's able to listen in on his parents' conversation. And the way this is treated, it could be anything, couldn't it? This emotion, this loneliness and isolation he feels, the disconnect between a father and a son, between parents and their child. Sure, this is about superpowers, but those superpowers are being used as a vehicle to explore one of the most central parts of the human experience: change and the fear that comes with it. Because for Jonathan Kent, that's what Superman represents: uncontrollable change. Every facet of his narration ties back to this, his musings on farming and Mother Nature, and how, though you till the land, sow the field, and reap the bounty, every now and then there has to be a price. And Superman is that price, that unexpected event that crashes into his world. It's only through facing his own fears and searching himself that he's able to get a clear look at Superman and understand that, even if it's different and not at all like he imagined, this is still his son's path. This is simply a father watching their child become their own person, watching them interact with an ever-changing world and hoping they've properly prepared them for that world. And like with any good parent, there comes a point where there's only one comfort you can offer in the face of this impossibly large world. I will love you, always. This issue alone is already such a powerful story. Jeff Loeb, one of comics' most prolific creators, is the writer here, and it's immediately clear why he's worked on so many comics. His moment-to-moment dialogue, plotting, and pacing. In this story, it's all masterful. Honestly, this issue could have existed on its own, and it already would have been a new favorite for me. And it's no wonder it feels so genuine, because Jeff Loeb is a father, and when he wrote this, his son Sam was only 10 years old. In that light, this really feels like words from a father to their boy, filtered through a superhero lens, and no less genuine for it. A big part of the grounded nature of these emotions comes down to the artist too, Tim Sale. His work is integral to the comic's tone. This cartoonish style, but with deep contrast between the lights and darks is unique and striking. There's this care and attention to detail and expressiveness that just makes the world feel so lived in. And Bjarne Hansen's colors, the watercolor look is both painterly and nostalgic, and it really brings the comic to life. Plenty of images are almost entirely shades of a single color, without sacrificing any clarity. In fact, the picture only looks more cohesive. Less is truly more here. So many pages and panels feel like something I could frame and put up on my wall. And it's the connections and contrast drawn between the narration and art that leave me discovering more every time I've reread it. Then there's Summer, and Lois Lane's perspective along with it. Just like with Pa Kent, Superman represents a major change in her life. He makes her question everything she'd assumed about the world. After all, she's a pretty cynical person. As Daily Planet editor-in-chief Perry White told her, "Believe none of what you hear, half of what you see, and everything you write." But now, that all feels like BS before Superman. Lois's wit and sense of humor immediately set her apart from Pa Kent's more direct perspective. It truly feels like we're hearing from a different writer now, and this is by far the fastest I've ever found her endearing as a character. Not to say I disliked her otherwise or anything, but yeah, that's definitely a hallmark of a great writer. Someone who can get you invested with just a few lines of narration. Really, this whole issue is about Lois tackling her own skepticism, trying to decide if Superman is too good to be true. And though she doesn't know how someone with so much power is able to ground themselves, the art gives us the answer. Because this is Superman's true fortress of solitude, a green field going on and on into the horizon as he returns to the parents who will always love him. I adore how Lois's narration here isn't only used to give us her perspective, but also to highlight Superman's struggles. After all, she sees him as something so much larger than life, and yet, in the end, he wants to live a life just like hers. He wants to be among people, to help them, but he's just able to do that on a much larger scale. And how Lois makes Superman into this symbol in her mind, how unbelievable she finds him. It's a really powerful, character-driven way to show that no matter how much he tries to be one of them, he will always be something else, for better or worse. Because Clark is concerned about his place in the world. After all, he wants to be a person, but he's also different and has responsibilities a normal human can't understand. It touches on a really interesting dichotomy for Superman, that for him, Clark is also a sort of disguise, a secret identity, and he needs that because then he can at least try to feel like one of them. However, that only becomes more difficult for him as even his safe haven, just like everything else in his life, changes. It's a worry that directly mirrors his father's in the first issue, as brilliantly highlighted by the art. Both he and his father sitting there, the stars reflected in their glasses, endless possibilities, the fear that comes with them, and the beauty, too. The hope. Because for Lois Lane and so many other people, that's what Superman truly is. A symbol of hope, a faith in a world and a people that can change for the better. Maybe Superman can replace those evil men like Lex Luthor and become a new headline not only for her life, but for Metropolis at large. And then there's Fall and Lex Luthor himself. Much like with Lois, this is the version of the character that I immediately latched onto, because this Lex is just so human. Don't get me wrong, he's still a monster and a megalomaniac, but also, I really got into his head and understood his perspective. To him, Superman is a change of the worst sort. It's him losing his place in the world as the most important man in Metropolis. The issue's second page alone already makes that clear. Lex Luthor's thoughts on his city juxtaposed against this giant billboard that labels Metropolis the home of Superman. My single favorite moment in this issue comes right here with something so simple, when Lex's assistant accidentally nicks him while shaving. They panic, clearly scared this frightening man will hurt them. And his response? There's nothing to be sorry about. You made a mistake. I forgive you. But this isn't some simple, kind gesture. No, this is a microcosm of Lex's feelings at large. His city also hurt him, but he's forgiven it. However, if it won't see the light on its own, if it won't accept him again, well, then he'll work from dawn till dusk to make that happen. And it's those quiet moments the comic chooses to highlight, those little scenes, those little everyday actions filtered through Lex Luthor's craziness. That's what makes him feel so human. So, in his desperation, he unleashes a virus on the city, but gives the cure to a woman who obsessed over Superman after he saved her. For Lex, this was a moment of ultimate humiliation. He was supposed to be the one to protect her, to protect his city. Now though, Lex sends her with Superman to fix this problem, but he hasn't made her immune to the virus itself. So, in the end, she takes in too much of it and dies in Superman's arms. And just like that, Lex has twisted one of Superman's acts of heroism into a failure. I love all of this. The way Lex's despicable plan slowly builds and builds as we get more of his perspective, his humanity contrasted by his horrible pride. Much like with Lois, Superman is something larger than life and unbelievable, but to him, that's terrifying. He only stands to lose from this shakeup to the status quo. And then there's the way he mirrors Pa Kent too. After all, what did Jonathan say about the forces of nature? Every now and then, there has to be a price. And what does Lex say here? I learned from my father to always give people what they want, but always for a price. And immediately after, as this woman's heart stops, there he stands, a bolt of lightning slashing across him. It's such an evocative image. Lex is so narcissistic that he sees himself as the force of nature, as the storm, as the one who bends the world to his whims. Superman tried to be that uncontrollable change that crashed into his life, but he won't allow it. He'll send Superman running back to wherever he came from, ashamed, a failure, and afraid. So Superman returns home for winter, and we get our final perspective. Lana Lang, Clark's childhood friend. And what does Superman represent to her? Well, change and loss, similar to the rest, but also a bit different. Because the moment she first encountered Superman, that she learned Clark had these powers, she knew that the life she'd imagined for herself would never be. I absolutely love how this issue digs further into not just what Superman means for others, but what it means for Clark too. Because Superman represents all the things that make Clark different from other people. The power, the responsibilities, the weight on his shoulders, the loneliness. Which leads us to one of my favorite moments. Here, Clark's sitting on his bed again, mirroring multiple other pages of the story where he's just been lonely and afraid and unsure of what to do. However, now, his father is right there to give him the advice he needs. Because even the so-called Superman needs room to fail and grow. That's just what it means to be human. And so Lana connects with him too. She's able to recognize the weight on his shoulders, the worries he has, all of it. Because at the end of the day, even if he's working on a bigger scale, are they really so different? To understand that man in the cape who could fly, all I needed to know was Clark. In a lot of ways, Lana's perspective ends up feeling the most like the reader's own. What I mean is that the way she connects things to herself, it encourages the reader to consider what they can do too, and what Superman means to them. As she says while she watches Clark save the town from a flood, every time a nurse bandages a wound, every time a pastor offers comfort, every time a parent hugs their child, these are the choices each of us makes, not only to do good, but to inspire good in others. The same way that here, we see how much Lana has grown. After all, when Clark first showed her his abilities, she kissed him, but it was because she wanted him to stay with her. Now, however, after taking the time to understand him, she's willing to give him the support he needs, telling him that he can go now and be Superman. And that's what Superman's all about, isn't it? The simple goodness of everyday people made into something fantastical. And yet, in the end, the comic implores the reader to see themselves in Superman. The same way Jeff Loeb himself used this Superman comic to explore fatherhood and his own feelings. To ask that question of what does Superman mean to me? In the end, I think that's often the point of the best Superman stories. That Superman isn't special because he's different from us. He's special because he is us. And though it might sound a bit cheesy or saccharine, we can all be kind. We can all help others in our own small ways, because little acts of kindness inspire even greater ones. Those are the seeds that Kent's planted and sowed, those simple human lessons that guide their son. And though none of us can do the things he does, we can all still learn and grow. That's what Superman means to me. Originally, this was the end of Superman for All Seasons, an already fantastic culmination of the story's themes as Clark learns to accept that he is Superman and Superman is him. However, in the 2023 edition, another backup story was included, though even it was written many years prior. Unfortunately, in 2005, Jeff Loeb's son Sam passed away after battling bone cancer for years. However, this teenage boy was already a comic writer, and so he wrote the story for issue 26 of Superman/Batman, a comic which his father had written up to that point. And here, many other comic writers and artists banded together to finish what he'd started after his passing. Here, Robin tells a tale about Superboy after he dies. It's largely disconnected from the other events of the comic series thus far, and as Jeff Loeb himself said, all the different people working on it resulted in art that's disjointed in a way that Sam would find very funny. And in that same issue, there was another story. Sam's story. Jeff Loeb wrote it only 10 days after his son's passing, when the president of DC Comics at the time encouraged him to take what had happened and make something. So Tim Sale also returned to do the art for it, creating something that feels like a direct continuation of Superman for all seasons. The story itself is short and simple. A tale of Clark's friend Sam, a boy who could brighten anyone's day and always made people laugh, who was eventually diagnosed with bone cancer. And just like how the original issues were about change, this one is too. It's about death, about loss, about grief. As Jonathan Kent says, with the stars once again reflected in his glasses, Clark, there are two things in life that we can be sure of. You are born and you will die, and you don't have anything to say about either of them. But it's what you do in between. That's what you have control over. That's how you live your life. It's just so unfair. Yes. Yes, it is. And finally, we land on Sam's handwritten words. Your destiny does not lie in a hospital bed. Far greater achievements are to come. Own your destiny. Best friends, best doctors, best outlook. No worries. To me, this is what Superman, what stories in general really, are all about. Grappling with life, with our humanity, and using that as a lens through which we can view our struggles and maybe try to come to terms with them. And I just think it's beautiful that through this character, Jeff Loeb wasn't only able to create one of the most wonderful and touching contemplations on fatherhood I've ever read, but also write this dedication to his son, Sam.